Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to The Plant Path. I'm your host, Sajah Popham. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join me here. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about constitutional imbalance, disease, and all the different points in between. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last year or so. And I think it's something that's worth considering and worth talking about, and worth observing the various ways in which we can consider using plants to help people. You know, I think one of the potencies of herbal medicine is that we can work with them not just to treat disease or sickness or various pathological patterns, but we can work with them also to improve the vitality of the system, to strengthen the body, to revitalize the organ systems, to prevent really the onset of more serious disease. And it's good to think about, in my opinion, how we define health and wellness and how we define disease, and what are the stages that we go through, kind of like what is the progression, because it's not like we're just, doo-doo-doo going along in our daily life and everything is just humming along perfectly, and then all of a sudden you have a chronic disease out of nowhere, right? Typically, there is there are stages, there's a progression, there's a disease progression, and of course, the earlier that we can catch those things and start addressing them at a root level, the better. And this is what I see as one of the strengths of herbal medicine is that in many instances, if you're in a conventional allopathic model, you go to a doctor, there's certain characteristics and markers that you have to have in order to be actually diagnosed as having a particular disease, right? Maybe certain numerical factors in your blood work, certain boxes, right, that you got to check in order to say you have this particular diagnosis. And you might have one or two of those boxes ticked, but not the five or more that you need to be said to have this disease or something like that. And then you say, oh well, you don't meet the diagnostic criteria. You don't have this disease. Nothing I can do for you. We'll just keep checking on it. And when you do finally get the disease, then we've got some drugs for you. But meanwhile, technically, you don't have this disease, even though you might be suffering or at the very least sensing that something is not quite right in your body. So the herbs are incredible because we can work with plants at these various stages of development, from being healthy to having a degree of constitutional imbalance, and then the stages of progression to disease. So I kind of want to talk about that. What are the points in between? What are the steps that we move from being healthy to being sick? And how can we consider plants on those different stages or steps in that process? So one thing that I like to think about here is that the health or lack of health of the body is not a static state. We have this term that we use. I remember hearing this term a lot in biochem, medical biochemistry, anatomy and physiology. This term homeostasis, right? Which is a word used to generally denote a state of balance within the body. And in many ways, homeostasis is thought of as a relative state of health, right? Like when your body is in a state of homeostasis, it's balanced, it's healthy, nothing is malfunctioning. But what's the main word there is stasis. It indicates a static state of being. And so you're either in homeostasis and you're healthy, or you're not and you're sick. And so we think of these as being very static states. And one term I remember hearing from one of my plant heroes, well, it's not a plant, but it's a person that would talk about the plants, was Stephen Herod Buhner. And he would use the term homeodynamis, which I actually really like because it shows that health and disease are dynamic states, that it's a constant state of fluctuation and change, much like everything in nature. There's constant fluctuation and change, even though there's rhythm and routine, right? Spring follows winter, summer follows spring, the sunrise follows night, right? There's a rhythm and a structure to the movement of nature, but within that structure, there's a lot of dynamic change and fluctuation. And I think the same is true with our body. So homeodynamis, it's a dynamic state. And so in that way, I think a more optimal way of thinking about the state of health and diseases as a spectrum is that there are multiple points in between. It's not just, oh, you're either healthy or you're sick, but there's some finer delineations in that process, in that transition from a healthy state to a disease state that we can consider and look at. And it's good to recognize where people are at in that spectrum when you are working with them, because that can indicate what types of remedies you would want to use, how strong those remedies should be or should not be, how frequently they should be used, the duration of usage, etc. Right? So it can really influence your therapeutics that you consider for people. And we all sense this, right? We all know that we may not necessarily have some full-blown disease or some major diagnosis, or that we're not acutely sick, right? You don't have a cough, cold, or flu. But you might have some of those things that are like, yeah, I'm not fully healthy. Like, I'm not as healthy as I could be. We all have those little minor annoying things that happen within our body, right? Everybody's got their little aches, their little pains, their little physical upsets. And while I think it's good to not go too overboard with those, like, oh my goodness, like, I've got that little twinge of whatever here in my pinky, it's like, it's good to be aware of those things, but in some instances too, it's also good to not let them bog you down. I think there's a balance. Like, I see two ends of a spectrum here where some people just on one end of that are just, oh, it's fine, whatever, tough it out, move on, ignore it, move on. And there can be perhaps a time and a place for that. Although if you do that too much, that can turn into kind of ignoring the health of your body, which over time, can lead to problems for sure. So you don't want to just like completely ignore the communication, right? The vital intelligence of your body trying to tell you something. But on the other end of that spectrum, you can get sometimes folks that are maybe a little too hypersensitive, a little too hyper aware. Obviously that can turn into being a little bit of oh boy, what's the term? The word where people just think they're constantly sick all the time. I'm blanking on the word right now. For some reason, I want to say a narcoleptic, but that's when you just involuntarily fall asleep. Definitely not that. Right, but when people just can sometimes get a little too hyper aware of their body and kind of blow what might be a little minor thing kind of out of proportion, make it into a bigger deal, call in sick for work because they've got a little minor discomfort in their body. I think that's just a part of having a body, is that you will be uncomfortable in it from time to time. It's like you can't always expect to be in a state of perfection. And I think that's one pitfall that some people in the alternative medicine movement can fall into, where you're people that are really health conscious and really trying to be, eat all organic and use herbs and exercise and, eat the right diet and take really good care of their health. It's good. It's good to do that, right? It's good to be health conscious. But it's also good to accept the fact that we are in a body. We are in this mortal flesh. We are in a fallen world. We are not going to be perfect, and our bodies will have issues with it. It's just a part of life. And I think that the more that we can accept that, the more sane we'll feel. Because to me, to strive to exist in a state of perfection of physical health and to never experience any pain or problem in your body is almost like the equivalent of seeking perfect spiritual enlightenment forever and ever. Some people, there are saints, there are enlightened mystics, but for most of us mere mortals, we're not quite there yet. So we have to be able to accept, living in a body. So there's a spectrum, right? This is not necessarily a static state. There's a spectrum. The unique nature of our herbal medicine is such that it doesn't require us to be in a full-blown disease state to utilize those herbs. So we can work with herbs to support health, not just to treat disease, but to support health, to be rejuvenative in nature, to enhance our vitality, rather than just treating disease. And so this spectrum between peak optimal health and disease is also useful to identify because it can help us point us towards the strength of the medicines to use, from our most mild food-like nutritive tonic herbs to the other end of the spectrum where you have your very low dose, potentially slightly toxic if used incorrectly, potent, powerful herbal medicines, right? Basically, things like nettle leaf and alfalfa and oat straw on one end to, poke root and lily of the valley and, lobelia and pulsatilla are really strong low-dose herbs on the other end of that. And then, of course, you've got a spectrum of strength of plants in between. And I think those herbs kind of can match that. If someone has a very minor constitutional imbalance, I'm not going to give them a super crazy strong low-dose botanical for it. I'm going to give them I'm going to give them an herb of a strength that matches the severity of their problem. One lesson that I really took home from studying with Paul Buhner was always use the mildest remedy to get the job done, right? Don't give someone gentian as a digestive bitter if dandelion root will get the job done. Don't give them, hops as a sedative or a nervine if chamomile will do the trick. So, and to go even further from that, don't even use the mildest herb if the corrective thing would be to alter something in the diet or the lifestyle, because an herb actually can't replace a bad habit, basically, right? Herbs can't replace bad habits. And so we have to think about the therapeutics matching the severity of the issue that the person is dealing with. And in general, a good general rule of thumb is use the mildest remedy possible that will get the job done. And if getting the job done is actually a dietary thing, a lifestyle thing, then that's what needs to be attended to, and no herb can really replace that. Okay, so let's talk a little more about this spectrum, right? From the what I think of as the journey from health to disease and all of the points in between. And for me, I really, like, as a father, I like to think of that baby, that brand new, fresh little baby that is born into this world, and how they are just, they're pure, they come out, they're clean, they are pure. some traditions kind of see the child as this clean slate. It's like there's that freshness of that new life that we haven't been exposed to anything really yet. Although the second we're born, we're exposed to all kinds of things, depending on how you go about it. But right, like that baby hasn't made any bad decisions yet. That baby hasn't even eaten any food yet. That baby hasn't made any wrong decisions. You know what I mean? It's like they're fresh and they're pure and they're clean. Now, of course, we do have things that we sometimes inherit. We have certain. It's like there's always this kind of dichotomy, right? And you hear this in not just in medicine, medical traditions, and kind of ways of thinking about the health of the body and the state of the body, but you also see this in cultural discussion and political discussion. Is like, are we a blank slate, or do we have a nature? Right? Are we a blank slate and that we're just conditioned and we turn into the people that we turn into because of what the culture tells us and what the TV tells us and what our parents tell us and what our teachers tell us and right? And then we're just this blank slate, and that everybody has their color and their brush and they paint us and that's what shapes us? Or do we have a core nature? Do we have a soul? In a lot of ways is one way of thinking about it. Do we have our own unique nature that is unique and distinct unto itself? And oftentimes they're really seen as a either or kind of thing. I think both are true. I think that we are born into this world obviously unconditioned, right? We are born a clean slate in many ways. But yet there is a slate and there is a nature to that clean slate. There is we have, from a traditional perspective, we would say that we are born with a certain constitutional pattern. We are all born with a certain unique composition of the elements, for example. And this, of course, goes all the way back to classic Greek philosophy in the West, right? Aristotle, and talking about the elements and the humors. Ayurveda talks about this. Chinese medicine talks about, all the different medical traditions talk about this, that we have a constitution. We have a certain nature, right? That we all got earth, water, air, and fire in us, but in slightly different ratios, different amounts of each. And those qualities shape the nature of our body, the temperament of our mind, our personality, our disposition. It generates certain strengths and weaknesses within the organs of the body. I would say, to use more of a modern scientific understanding, we inherit certain genetics, right? We inherit certain genetic patterns from our mother and our father. Of course, there are some, very unfortunate incidences of babies born with some sort of genetic disease, some sort of genetic incompatibility. Something kind of goes haywire and they, are born with some sort of health problem from the get-go. But so we have this clean slate dynamic in that we are unconditioned. And then we also have our core constitutional nature. Now, as we grow and develop, things happen, right? Even as a baby, right? You're baby and you start to maybe eat those first foods, or, you put the clothes on your skin, and, we've seen some babies, maybe they're really sensitive to certain kind of fabrics or certain soaps that they're using in the bath time, or, they start eating, maybe they try certain foods and then they get the little rashes, and right, and then they get their first cold, the first flu, that first fever, the first bumps and scrapes and bruises, and we grow and we're eating certain things and we're exposed to certain environments. We're born and raised in a certain habitat, a certain environment, a certain ecosystem. We take certain medications, we get vaccinations, we go to school, we're told certain things, our parents tell us certain things, we're exposed to a home life, a culture, a community, a school, right? And all these things are interfacing with the body, with the mind, with our consciousness. And in essence, we encounter the world around us and put things into our body and put things into our mind and perceive things with our senses. And these all start to put layers upon us, right? They start to affect us. They start to influence us. We have that core constitutional nature, and all of a sudden, maybe our core constitutional nature is we're really hot and fiery, but maybe we live in a really cold environment. And maybe we don't really move around that much. Maybe we sit in front of the TV and just become a potato, couch potato, and maybe eating a lot of cold and wet, damp kind of foods, and right. And then all of a sudden you get these layers put on top. And this is in Ayurveda. They say, in a way, you have two constitutional patterns. You've got your what they would call, and pardon my likely mispronunciation of these terms, but you have your prakruti, which we could say is like your nature, your core nature, your inborn constitutional pattern. And then you have your vikruti, which is like, it's like the layers on the onion, right? It's your assumed constitution. It's the pathological pattern, right? It's the imbalanced state. It is the state of being that you are now that is incongruent to the core constitutional pattern. And that is kind of what we would think of as the beginning stages on this progression. So, this as a human, as we experience the world, it changes our body. It changes the nature of our body. Sometimes the progression from health to disease can happen very quickly for some individuals, right? Sometimes a kid has an allergy to a food and they don't know it, and they're constantly eating it, and they develop all these problems really quickly. That doesn't happen. Sometimes they don't have any really major problems until they get older. Now, of course, I'll just mention as a side note, it's perfectly normal and natural as you're a child and an adolescent to get sick, right? To get acute coughs, colds, flus, RSV, COVID, whatever, because that's just part of life. That's part of the maturation of the immune system. It's part of our body learning how to cope with the environment, how to remain in balance with the environment. And that actually is a very important process to the development of health and vitality. And in a lot of ways, the degree of, like, one question that I use a lot when I'm working with people is fever suppression. Like, how many times have they had fevers suppressed? If they always got fevers as a kid and they always took the Advil or the Tylenol or whatever, that can sometimes be an indicator on the pathway towards disease, because that suppression, chronic suppression of the vital force, can lead to chronic disease, as the vital force is striving to express itself and striving to clear the body, and that can drive things deeper in. So sometimes we jump from healthy to full-blown disease quickly. Other times it takes a long time. And the process can get increasingly complicated as time goes by, especially in this modern world. So I really like to think of it as the onion analogy, right? That the core constitution is the center of the onion. And as we grow and experience the world, layers are placed upon that onion. And often by the time we're in the middle of life, there are multiple layers to that onion, and through our therapeutics as herbalists, our job is to peel those layers back, exposing and treating them layer by layer until we get back to the purity of that core constitutional nature. And then the work is to really strive to live in accordance with that constitutional nature to maintain its homeodynamic state. So let's talk about the spectrum a little bit. Boy, I guess that was a real long build-up into the main thing I wanted to talk about in this post. So, all right, let's talk about this spectrum. Loosely define some of these stages on the spectrum. These are, these are just my way of thinking through these stages. Of course, it's kind of like, just trying to put a little bit of a definition on some of these. You might think of it differently. That's totally fine. I think just recognizing some of the steps that we can take, whatever you call them or however you think of them, is good. So long as you're not just thinking in terms of health, disease, as long as you're thinking of that there is a process in between those two, both from health to disease, but also a process from disease back to health, right? You're not going to just magically go from being super chronically ill to perfectly healthy overnight in a very similar way that it's unlikely you're going to go from perfectly healthy to seriously chronically ill overnight. Okay, so we'll move from health to disease. Well, we could say the perfected state is the ultimate goal, which we could say is kind of like an enlightened state, which would be not just a physical health, but it would be a psychological, emotional, and a spiritual health too. So we might think of that as the enlightened state. Paracelsus has a really great quote on this. He says, "If man were in possession of a perfect knowledge of self, he would not need to be sick at all. He should study himself and the rest of creation so that he may attain self-knowledge, and this self-knowledge should be above all obtained by the physician." So Paracelsus is a real proponent of physician as philosopher, basically. And to him, philosopher, not just sitting in an armchair thinking about things, but a philosopher of nature, to study the patterns of nature and to see that the patterns in nature are reflected within the life of the human being, and specifically reflected in the body of the human being. And that to have that in this, and that is what he referred to as anatomia or anatomy, right? The macrocosmic anatomy and the microcosmic anatomy, and seeing the connection between the two. And of course, most of us mere mortals are not in a state of perfect enlightenment, nor will we be. So we might think of a next state from that would be what we might think of as peak health. And I would say, for the most part, this is what we're aiming for if we're thinking of it this way. And I think, to me, peak health, again, is not just a lack of disease. Peak health is, again, not just health in the organs and the systems and the tissues of the body, but it's a sense. Peak health, it's a sense. There is physical strength, right? So our body is strong, but it's not so strong that like you can't bend or move, right? So it's strong yet flexible. There's a state of vitality and energy. Like we have energy. We're not just like slogging through every day. We wake up in the morning, we feel well rested, we feel energized physically, but it's also, to me, peak health is also a psychological state. It's a clear and inspired psychological state. It's a state of mental clarity and focus. It's a state of, your mind's not all bogged down and cloudy and distracted and scattered and all over the place, but it's focused. It's a mind that there's a sharpness to the mind. There's a focus to the mind. And to me, that also translates into, if we think of the alchemical concept of the spirit, is differentiated from the soul, right? The spirit would be, in alchemy, the spirit is the mercury principle, is the air and the water element. So it relates to the mind, the air, and the emotional side, the water element. And so you'd say, when someone is in high spirits, right? It's like, what is that? Well, it's an optimism of the mind. It is a hopeful feeling in the heart. It is a striving towards goodness, a striving towards virtue. So there's, I like to think of it as emotional buoyancy, right? That peak health is like I wouldn't say you control your emotions. It's not like you try to control them. You allow yourself to feel what you're feeling and you express it in a healthy and appropriate way based on your surroundings, based on your circumstances, etc. And I would say peak health is also one in which you're able to attend to your spiritual development, your whether that be your religion, whether that be your prayer, your meditation. You have enough vitality to ask the bigger questions of life, of why am I here? What is my moral compass? How can I strive to be the best version of myself that I can be? How can I be in service to something greater than myself? God, the Great Spirit, the Creator, however you want to think about it. So in alchemy, we would say the peak health too is a state of living in accordance with our own constitutional nature internally, as well as living in accordance with nature externally, where we express the most virtuous aspects of our own unique, we would say, kind of archetypal nature, right? This is something I like the way Jordan Peterson talks about archetypes. He says, we all live out an archetypal story. It just kind of matters whether we're aware of it or not, and whether we are living out the shadow side of that archetype or the virtuous side of that archetype. But there's no archetype option, right? And so in the alchemical view, it would be peak health is that we are expressing the most virtuous aspects of our of the archetypes that we seem to be in congruency with the most. In alchemy, that's done through an understanding of the planets, the planetary bodies, as the structure of the solar system is reflective of the structure of the human psyche, and that so that we're living in harmony with nature, right? Like we've all heard that before. What the hell does that mean? Well, I mean, I think it means a lot of things. It means we're living in accordance with our own nature, meaning we understand our constitution and we live and act and eat and think and live in a way to try to maintain the balance of our own constitutional nature, without getting overly, what's the word? How do you say? Without getting too uptight about it, like you got to be able to enjoy your life too and not be too like, oh, I can't eat that little thing because it's got some, because it's dried and it's going to imbalance my constitution. It's like, well, you got to live a little too. So let's be honest. The peak health is commonly a fleeting state. I always like to joke around that like, you'll have this moment of being perfectly balanced. So your body is perfectly balanced, your heart, your mind, your spirit, perfectly balanced with nature, and then like the wind blows and then you're off balance again, right? And your skin gets dry or whatever, and you get a little gassy and bloated or whatever, you eat the garbanzo beans, and you're like, oh, there we go again. Right? And you're out of balance. So again, it's not a static state. It is in constant flux. It is a dynamic state. And it's not, there's not like some peak of a mountain and that once you get there, you're there forever. I used to think that. I used to think, oh, there's this place of spiritual enlightenment. And once I get there, I'll just be enlightened. Or there's this peak state of health. And once I just do this or that or live this way or do that routine or whatever, then I'll just be at that peak state and it'll be that way forever. It's like, no, it's constant maintenance. It's constant balance. So the next phase from peak health, good health, would be constitutional imbalance. And I kind of jokingly like to call this state healthy enough, right? It's like, I think this is where a lot of people that would generally consider themselves healthy are probably in a little bit of a constitutional imbalance, but they're healthy enough. So we're essentially in a slight state of imbalance, that's a minor alteration of our constitutional pattern, maybe a little bit of excess heat or cold or damp or dry, but not enough to become like a major issue. It might be these like minor health annoyances that come and go, right? Maybe some gas here and there, a sleepless night once in a while. Um, you know, those little minor health things that we all deal with, the aches, the pains, the little like, it's kind of annoying, but it's not quite enough to send you to the doctor, right? I would also add that in this state, oftentimes we would note some minor degrees of nutrient deficiencies. And actually, sometimes a lot of those little minor annoyances can be due to nutrient deficiencies. But generally, this is the beginning of a process of a weakening of the vitality to the point of making us more susceptible to manifesting disease. The state is countered easily, typically, through simple dietary lifestyle modifications, sometimes minor supplementation, mild herbs. So this state is like good to be aware. Like I was saying earlier, it's good to be aware of some of these things, right? It's good to be aware of your minor constitutional imbalances. But there is that danger of getting overly worried and uptight and cautious and narcissistic about it, where you're just so hyper focused on every little imbalance that you become just too uptight about it, basically. So good to be aware of it. So that would be what I think of as constitutional imbalance or healthy enough. Then you have acute sickness or injury. Of course, this happens to us all, right? We catch something that's going around, a temporary state of a more serious imbalance than constitutional imbalance, but nothing that's gone chronic, enough to produce distinctly uncomfortable signs and symptoms. Obviously, these would be our standard kind of coughs, colds, flus, infectious states that come and go. The ideal situation when these arise is that the acute symptoms are actually allowed to express, that are not suppressed, and that the vital force is able to restore health itself, or is supported through gentle natural remedies, right? That the fever is not suppressed with Tylenol, that the immune system is allowed to fight the infection off, perhaps on its own, if minor, or perhaps with the assistance of some natural remedies. If acute symptoms are suppressed, it will likely weaken the system as a whole in the long term and can produce further problems in the future, as chronic suppression of acute conditions often lead to chronic disease. So that's something to be very mindful of. I place acute injury here as this obviously happens too. So this would be, injury, accidents, broken bones, things like that. So that's more the acute things, right? So you can see the progression. We're enlightened, we have peak health, we have minor constitutional imbalances, we get acutely sick or injure ourselves every now and then. Then next you have what I think of as like generalized illness. This is where people start noticing that something in their body is off, and it's typically on a more consistent basis. These aren't the things that come and go. This is where it's like, okay, like I have a constant nagging pain here, or I have this constant upset in my digestion, or whatever it might be. Here, the constitutional imbalances have progressed to a point where there are more consistent repeating symptoms. In general, there's either an increase in the severity of the symptom or the frequency of the symptom, or both. This stage is below the level of chronic disease, but there's certainly deeper levels of imbalance that can cause, no small degrees of suffering. So depending on the strength or stubbornness of the person, this is when people may begin to either, one, seek the aid of a practitioner, two, ignore it or tough it out, or three, know what changes they need to make and do it themselves. Usually people fall in one of those three. More often than not, it's either one or two. They're going to go get some help, or they're going to tough it out. and or oftentimes people that are kind of in the world, I guess, of health and medicine and herbs and nutrition and things like that will oftentimes, well, unfortunately, oftentimes they'll take to the internet to try to figure out what's going on and fix it themselves that way. I don't know if that's always a good idea or not. Usually not, but sometimes maybe people can find some good things there. But the challenge here is with conventional medicine. This is what I was talking about earlier. Is that at this stage, people sometimes don't meet diagnostic criteria for any explicable disease. So this is kind of this weird gray area where maybe their labs are at the high or low ends of normal, right? It's like they're in the range, but they're right on the edge. Perhaps they don't check all the boxes to be diagnosed of having a certain disease. Their symptoms aren't bad enough to warrant drug treatment. So they kind of end up in this limbo place where basically the doctor can't really give them a drug because they can't diagnose them with a certain disease because they don't meet the set criteria. And it's basically kind of a like, let me know when you feel worse and then I'll treat you kind of situation. This is really the perfect stage to bring in herbal medicine, right? This is the ideal stage to be working with slightly stronger herbs, more in-depth supplementation, really observing the lifestyle, the diet, what types of habitual modifications can be done there to try to steer the ship, right? To right the ship back towards the direction of health, to turn this more generalized illness, this kind of vague ill state that's not full-blown disease, but it's more serious than a constitutional imbalance. You want to try to steer it back to maybe just a minor constitutional imbalance and try to reestablish it. Because this is the stage where, man, if it keeps going, progressing in the direction of the next stage where it becomes a lot more difficult to correct, which would be number 6 is disease. So this is the point where you would actually meet some form of diagnosable criteria, and in conventional medicine would be labeled with having a certain disease or pathological pattern. They meet some sort of diagnosis. Obviously here you're not feeling well, and many here will seek medical attention or should. Typically this stage is more of a chronic nature. So this is, at this stage, this is not like, oh, these things come and go, and at constitutional amounts, like, yeah, it's kind of annoying, but whatever, I can tough it out, I can ignore it. Or generalized illness is going to be like, hey, yeah, that thing's really kind of there all the time, and I sure wish it wasn't there, but I can bear it. Once you get here, this is like something is wrong, right? Like something is really wrong with my body. I need help. So again, increased severity, increased frequency, often multiple various complaints. These are not minor annoyances or inconveniences, but we're reaching a point where this is negatively impacting your life, right? You have impaired function, you have impaired structure, you have impaired quality of life. You got to kind of think of like the psychology of when someone goes to a practitioner, right? Is like they've been on this journey and they've got to, especially if you're an herbalist and they're sitting in front of you asking for help. It's like you got to put yourself in their shoes, right? They've been living their life and they've been like, maybe feeling all right. And these little things, okay. And they're like, a couple years go by, it's getting a little bit worse. And then all of a sudden it gets to a point where they're like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I can't live like this anymore. I need some help. And then maybe they go to the MD, they try a couple different MDs, go to some specialists. Maybe they try acupuncture. Maybe they try a nutritionist. Maybe they try the this. Maybe they try the that. And then all of a sudden they find themselves sitting in front of the herbalist because none of those other people were able to help. Which is intimidating for a lot of herbalists because they're like, well, geez, if they couldn't help this person, why would I be able to? And that's why I always say you need to have a little bit of a different perspective, a little bit of a different approach than everyone else. Here we're going to use typically stronger herbal medicines at higher dosages, dosed more frequently. And usually at this stage, you really need to incorporate full protocols that involve deep dietary assessment, You really got to look at the lifestyle. Are they living in a way that is really adversely impacting their health? It's very important to look at those things. You don't want to boss people around and tell them what to do and how to be in a bossy way. But if they're going to hire you for your help, they're asking you for your perspective. So in my opinion, they're hiring you. Share what you know. If you see them doing something that may be adversely impacting their health, I think it's your duty to inform them of that, and then they can take with that and do it with it as they will. And then, of course, the final stage would be death, which we obviously is a part of life, and we cannot circumvent death. So while I broke these down into some categories here, these are not set in stone or even really necessarily clearly defined. These are just my kind of loose definitions and what kind of potency of herbs, strength of dosage, and frequency of dosage I tend to think of on this spectrum. I wanted to share this because I think it's just kind of nice to think of these milestones on the progression from peak health to disease, and then on the journey back from disease to hopefully peak health, and all the different points in between those. Of course, our goal as herbalists is to guide people back down that pathway towards peak health and supporting them along the way. And yet, at the same time, I do think it's important to understand that the complete amelioration of suffering in someone's life is not possible. I mean, it's just suffering is innate to this human existence. I don't know if we can stop that. I think the way in which we have been created and the intelligent design of this life is that we will suffer. And I think it has to do with how well we navigate it. So the ability of an herbalist to recognize where someone is at in these stages can be really, really helpful to develop. I think, again, this is one of the strengths of herbal medicine, is that we have this ability to even take someone that's in peak health and maybe work with them on their psychological side, the emotional side, even their spiritual side. And by spiritual side, I mean just like what parts of themselves do they want to develop? Maybe they want to express themselves better. Maybe they want to feel more confident in themselves. Maybe they want to feel more strength in their body, right? These are all things that herbs do have the power to do. We can address those minor constitutional imbalances with simple, just like a simple nutritive tonic tea, and maybe a little something to move their blood a little bit, or maybe a little something to relax some tension, or maybe some little things to help with their digestion, right? Minor things that can actually keep them in that state for longer. So even the generalized illness, we can use those herbs to bring them back. So we want to be able to recognize these states of health from constitutional balance to disease and all the points in between. So I want to thank you very much for joining me here on this episode of The Plant Path. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're anywhere but evolutionaryherbalism.com, be sure to head on over there where everything is happening. Don't forget, next month in March 2026, we're going to be opening up our Astro Herbalism mini course. So be sure to get notified of that. Get on our email list so you can get the announcements to join for that totally free workshop series. It's happening first week of March here, 2026. And subscribe, smash that like button, that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. It does really help support our channel. Be sure to leave us a good review on the Plant Path podcast. Those reviews do really help as well. And I just want to thank you for being a part of the evolutionary herbalism community, supporting what we do. And I hope that what we do supports you on your plant path. So thanks so much. Until the next time, take care and be well.